All right, our final speaker this morning is Steve Wittstock. He's come from Spokane, all the way from Spokane, Washington, to talk to us this morning. He's the corporate director of quality assurance with Oldcastle Materials in the Northwest Division. He's got 38 years of experience in the ready-mix asphalt and aggregate industry, and he's level 4 at our MCA concrete technologist, and claim to fame has paved in 7 states in the western United States. So, if you recall Wendy talking this morning about the aggregate blending that the technical committee is working with on MnDOT, this is a very timely presentation. Steve's going to talk to us about doing just that very thing. So, welcome, Steve. Thank you for coming.
So first of all, I'd like to say, 1, I am not an engineer. 2, I'm not a geologist. And 3, I am not a public speaker. So if I fall flat on my face, please forgive me. So what I wanted to talk today about was combined aggregate gradation and material blending. So hopefully you can all see this. In 2006, WSDOT, what we call Wittstock, included in Section 903 of their standard specification use of combined aggregate. Now this was done for a number of reasons. One is there's a lot of materials, especially in eastern Washington, where I'm from, which, by the way, I'm on the dry side of the state. Seattle's on the wet side of the state. So get into that a little bit and explain why this combined aggregate was put in place in the first place. So as you can see, in 2006, we went to a topside 1.5 inches all the way down to a number 4 material. Like most EOTs prior to this, we were limited to AASHTO and ASTM gradings. The specification was put in place partially because many producers were finding it more difficult to meet the individual grading requirements. I have pits that I cannot meet an AASHTO grading for sand, or I cannot meet an ASTM grading for sand, and I cannot meet coarse aggregate gradings also. So today, let's get into that a little bit and explain. So today, that specification has not changed much. They've added up to about a 3-inch top size. I personally have never used something this large, and in Wittstock, I'm not too sure where we would use it, but I'm sure they've obviously got us that there's some applications. So why is this such an importance to producers in Eastern Washington? Well, that answer, it lies in the past. The geological history of Eastern Washington is most of the sand and gravel deposits were the result of glacial outwash from ice sheet, kind of like Minnesota and the northern tier states. The glaciers came down, they deposited aggregates, and that's usually where most of our aggregates come from. However, in the Spokane area and in eastern Washington, there was a series of what we call the Missoula floods. And these are in addition to the outwash materials, the outwash materials, there was a vast amount of materials that were deposited by the Missoula floods from Glacial Lake, Missoula. Glacial Lake, Missoula was formed by an ice dam on the Clark Fork River that created a lake roughly the size of Lake Ontario and Lake Erie combined. Lake Ontario and Lake Erie combined. So it was a massive lake. Now what happened was that periodically this dam would fail and we would get these glacial outburst floods. So and I quote here, within minutes of the dam failure, a wall of water roughly 400 feet high and traveling greater than 70 miles per hour swept over what is now known as the Rafton Prairie. Where I live in the Spokane Valley is what we call the Rafton Prairie. So if you can kind of get that in your head, how much water that was. It was just a massive amount of water. In the Spokane area, the water rose to about 570 feet deep with a minimum discharge of 4.5. Once the water left the Spokane area, it spread out over the entirety of the eastern Washington before flowing down the Columbia River to the Pacific Ocean. It has been roughly estimated this occurrence happened 12 different times or greater. They don't know for exactly how many times this did happen. So this kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. I get this thing to work. So over here you have Glacial Lake, Missoula here. The ice dam was created here. And when it burst, it sent a wall of water. Through Spokane here, out into eastern Washington. Now you can see Seattle's over here, so you've got the Cascade Mountains. It scoured the land clean. So what was all there was removed. It came down here in what we call the Wallula Gap. And that's a natural gap in the Columbia River. The hills right there, the gap is probably 2 miles wide, but it's about 1,300 feet high. The water dammed up behind that thing and then released through it, came all the way out of Columbia and all the way down into Portland and down into Eugene, Oregon. We see aggregates from these floods. We have operations currently down in Salem and Eugene. We mine those aggregates that came from these glacial outwash events. So it was really dramatic. I mean, so the deposit. Now this is where I live. I live here in Spokane, and this is what we call the Rafton Prairie Aquifer. This is an aquifer, a natural aquifer that is underneath the area of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and Spokane, all the way up into Sandpoint up here. It's a natural aquifer. It's about 600 feet deep. It's our natural drinking water supply, but it is sitting in a trough. And this trough here it's just full of sand and gravel. So why do I show you all this? Well, the materials left behind by these glaciers and floods were fairly uniform in their deposit, but in many cases, certain size materials were found to be non-existent or in very short supply. In the pit we mine in Spokane, the aggregate sizes range from 2 to 3 foot boulders down to about the 200 screen. However, there is very little material passing the 16 screen that is usable or easily. And given that we mine in water, we mine with a floating dredge, during the process of extracting that material through the water, we lose a lot of that bottom material. We can't capture it. So an aggregate guy is going to look at this and he's going to go, well, wait a minute, you got about 60% of your material sitting on your floor screen. So what's your problem? You've got everything you need here. Well, if you look down here, I don't have any bottom end of this material. It's just not there. So a promised myself I wouldn't stand up here and give you a lot of charts and graphs and all that sort of stuff, but unfortunately I do. So this is what we call a coarse sand material. And as you can see there, the material passed in the number 8, if you were to compare it to an ASTM grading, I'm about 20-25%. I'm about 20-25% too low. So I am forced to blend material with that. Now what I should have done on a prior screen, I should have shown you there was a place where the material came through, where the floods came through the Spokane area. There is a natural basalt. I don't want to call it a natural basalt. I don't want to call it a dam, but it was an obstruction. But what it did, it created a huge backwash area, and a lot of sand and material was deposited in what we call North Spokane. We have a natural mortar sand we can dig straight out of the ground. Without washing it, we can create mortar sand. It, however, does meet an ASTM grading for C33 grading for fine aggregate, but it would be pretty unusual. It's about 85% pass in the 16 stream. It would be way too fine. It would be way too fine. So what we do is we take another sand from another deposit, we mix it with that mortar sand, and we make what we call a 60-40 blended sand. So now we've got 2 sands to make up the fine portion of 1 sand. So we make this 60-40 blended sand, we make this 60-40 blended sand. Again, it does not meet an ASTM grading or a washout grading. I then have to take that sand, mix it with my coarse sand to make my C33. So we've got 3 different pits to make 1 material for our concrete plant. Now, we talked about sand, and in the Spokane area, as we have dug deeper into our pit there, our main source of material, we're finding that the material, for whatever reason, is getting finer as we go deep. So we are becoming less and less three-quarter rock. So we're having to look at possibly importing a larger aggregate to supplement our smaller aggregate. So as you can see in Spokane, we primarily have to blend 2 or more sands to meet C33 or washed-out Class 1 or Class 2 sands. In other areas of eastern Washington, the pits are becoming more depleted. We're now having to blend coarse aggregates from other pit sources. So this is a pit. So this is a pit out there, an operation out in what we call the Euphrates area. And this one here, we're using 3 different pit sources. These are in different counties in order to make this 1 3/4 inch combined aggregate. So 1/4 inch combined aggregate. So we're having to move material, like I said, from 3 different pit sources to make 1. So these are a couple things. This one here is the gravel and the sand from one source, and then the gravel from another one. Again, this one is an inch and a half material. So we're moving materials around from multiple different sources to do this. So in eastern Washington, we have 11 batch plants, but they're being fed from 13 different pit sources. 5 of these pit sources, which are strictly sand sources. So again, Spokane's over here, and this is the Cascade Mountains here. So we have operations in Moses Lake, Yakima, and Wenatchee, and East Wenatchee. So we've got plants and pits set up, and we also have we're moving materials from Wenatchee out to Quincy, materials from Moses Lake into Quincy, because we don't have any pit sources in the Quincy area. We move material from this little operation here, which is called Matterhorn, and we move them out into Othello. So we're moving materials all over the place in order to meet, the requirements of what we need to do for our operations. So that's how I wanted to talk about the aggregate sources, why we blend and what we do. Now, if you go into the Seattle area, a lot of their operations there are what I would classify as single source. So they don't move materials around like we do. But Eastern move materials around like we do. But Eastern Washington, because of these, floods and whatnot, we're forced to. That's out of necessity. We would not be able to supply material if we did not have the ability to move material around. So a number of years ago, WSE did an extensive study on ASR damage to DOT structures, and the outcome of that study indicated that there were 2 structures in the state that had possible ASR damage. So because of the study, the DOT put in place the following limits on reactivity. So when it tested according to 1260 or ASTM T303 or 1260s, expansions greater than 2% or 0.2% are considered reactive and will require mitigation measures. However, what they state is if you're between 0.21 and 0.45, all we're going to require is an LA cement, which all the plants in Oregon, Washington, Montana area are all LA cements. We all have low alkali cements. Or you use 25% flat. So it's your option. You can do what you want. Greater than 0.45, the contractor must show mitigation measures to reduce expansion to less than 2/10. I can tell you on a 1260 test, most of the pits in Eastern Washington are going to range from about 0.25 to about 0.45 and even higher. And the reason is, with those floods and everything that we had a lot of basaltic material that was exposed, and within that basaltic material, geologists have explained to me that there's waterborne opals within the material itself, and they're highly reactive. So they kind of set that 1260 for the advent of using fly ash. However, when tested with 1293, the 1 year, we have to have expansions less than 0.04, and I think that's pretty standard for most people. Where we do get caught in a lot of this is when we do FAA or Corps of Engineer work. They're going to hold us at that 0.1% as 1260. So then we're really forced to mitigate. So of all the pits that we have, not one of them passes a T303 or 1260 test. And particularly in the north central part of the state, the limits are well over 0.5 or 0.45. I have a pit, and I was just talking to a friend of mine, and I said, what's the highest number we've seen in one of our pits? I have one in Seattle, that is a 1.0 on a 1260. And actually, when they did it, it twisted the bar. So it's really expensive. However, we do not have one pit except for one in northern Idaho that has failed in 1293. So we do really well on the 1293. So we have reactive aggregates, but we don't have any structures in place that would show reactive problems. So the washout requires mitigation measures to be taken off the worst case material. So like I go back to my sand materials in Spokane. I got to look at 3 different sands. I got to figure out which one am I going to mitigate to if I need to mitigate it off. And I do have sands in Spokane area that are going to be in the 0.3 to 0.4 range. So I'm going to be forced to either use, like I said, an LA cement or so up until the last amended specification on the combined aggregate, it had its own deleterious specifications. That's what washout had in place. They stated that the deleterious substance in the washed aggregate cannot exceed the following values. Specific gravity, not less than 1.9, less than 0.1 less than 1.95 cannot be less than 2%. Colorimetric has to be greater than 3. Aggregate retained under 4 shall not have an LA wear greater than 35 after 500 revolutions. Clay lumps, 0.3 or 0.03. Shale, 1%. Shale, 1%. And not understanding your guys' situation on shale, we do not have a shale problem. What I do have in the Spokane area is what we call a clay iron mudstone, which I did a little investigation this morning. It's kind of similar to a shale, but it's not. It's an expansive. It's not. It's an expansive material. It does swell in a freeze-thaw environment, but our percentages are very, very low. Wood waste 0.03. The amount finer than the 202% by weight. So, however, last January, they amended the specification to read that the coarse and fine portions of the coarse aggregate had to meet the respective specification for coarse and fine aggregate. So, if you were to make a washed out sand or a gravel, then the portions of the combined aggregate had to meet those deleterious specs. So most of our pits, this won't be an issue, but there could cause us a problem on the 200 because I am now getting into sand gradations that are pushing 3 and 4% passing the 200. And if you've ever tried to wash minus 16 sand, it creates one hell of a problem because it's not easy to handle. So you don't want to get into it. So we're really lucky. We can mine this right out of the banks. We can blend it together and it works pretty well. But we are getting pushed. So as our fine sand, like anybody else, they're building houses, they're building buildings and everything over our sand and gravel deposits. So those, at the end of the day, the producer is one that is held responsible for ensuring the concrete meets the specification. We're the ones that are being asked to produce these materials, to make these concrete, to meet these specifications. In section 602 of the washed out specs, the concrete placeability, workability, and strength shall be the responsibility. Workability and strength shall be the responsibility of the contractor. Unfortunately, the ready-mix producer, and I think somebody said it this morning, does not have a contractual relationship with the DOT. We do have a contractual relationship with the contractor, but not the DOT. But so they look to us to ensure that we meet these. They look to us to ensure that we meet these specifications. So we have to do what we need to do to make sure that we can do that. Like most of you are looking at, many DOTs are implementing high-performance bridge decks. In Washington, we have to keep following. We have to use a minus 1 inch gradation. Coulombs less than 2,000, freeze-thaw durability. You got two options. You can use 4.5 to 7.5, or a durability factor of 90 after 300 cycles. Scaling resistance or visual rating less than 2. Shrinkage 0.032. We can't do a bridge deck without an SRA, which creates its own set of problems in making these mixes. You have to conduct modulus elasticity. However, there is no specification as of yet, and you must report the density. I would like to throw in there the state of Idaho and the state of Montana are looking at these very similar specifications. However, they're throwing in a coefficient of thermal expansion, which I have yet to get my head wrapped around. I don't quite understand how that all works and how I'm going to test it. So, by 3 states, we could not do these in Eastern Washington unless we're allowed to blend our materials from multiple sources. The material, like I said, we're in a sand and gravel operation. We do have shot rock quarries, but for our concrete aggregates, we're in a sand and gravel situation. And sometimes that material is just not there. So we have no other option other than to blend. So hopefully I'll move through that pretty fast and get you guys on to lunch. So is there any questions? Any thoughts? Yes.
How does the Washington state DOT deal with the quality of the course aggregate?
They just look at the deleterious specification.
On each individual one, or
Now they look at the individual. So what you now have is the coarse aggregate, the coarse fraction of the combined aggregate is measured to the coarse aggregate specification. Measured to the coarse aggregate specification. So if it's like a 67 or a 467 or whatever, you got to meet those deleterious specifications.
Let's say you had one really high in that mudstone or shale, let's say, and one that was really clean. Would they?
You would
visualize the meter, or is it the two together?
You put the two together and mathematically, you run the numbers on this one, run the numbers on this one, and blend them back together and show that you can meet it. They have never come to us and said, okay, give me a combined sample, and then we test that. They're going to do the individual, and then we test that. They're going to do the individuals and mathematically combine them together at the proportions in the mix design. Any other questions? Yeah.
For your sand blending, are you doing that in pit or at the residence plant, and how are you doing that?
Two different ways. With two fine sands, we have a blending facility. We'll blend two of them together, and then we'll take our coarse sand and that blended fine sand at the batch plant and blend them together in the mix design. So that's how we make that. We have done on a couple occasions, had three sands run through the batch plant, but primarily we don't want to do that because most batch plants don't have enough bends if you're going to do other work. If you can dedicate a batch plant, not a problem, but in most cases we're going to blend two fine sands together and then mix it with what we call a coarse sand. And again, the deleterious specs are the same for the fine sand as they are.